Hello, in this video we're going to look at the software that controls my system where I use a Launchpad and a Teensy to choose patches from my two guitar synths. So strap yourself in. First of all, the way the program works is it sends program change messages to both the SY1000 and the GM800 via serial out. The serial out goes from the Teensy on serial 1 and serial 7 using the TX pins. To make the box and the system, you need an external Footswitch, a plastic box, a Teensy 4.1, a USB host cable, and a Launchpad Mini. And the Launchpad Mini is orientated so the N is at the top right-hand corner. Launchpads have two distinct sections of pads when sending MIDI to the Teensy. So first of all, we have a section in the middle, which looks like this. They're white if they're not lit. That's an 8x8 grid, and when you receive messages from the Launchpad, that comes as a MIDI note. So pressing a pad, you receive a MIDI note on the MIDI from the USB host. The other part is the black buttons around the outside, which are named or have arrows on them. When you press one of those buttons, you get a CC message. One of the quirks about the SY1000 is that it has a lot of presets. There are actually 4 banks of 100 presets, and because MIDI works on numbers up from 0 to 127, that's not enough numbers to just send a program change message. So they break them up into 4 distinct sections, which I'm going to call a bank. To choose which bank that you're looking at, you need to send a CC message with 0 as the CC number, and then another number, which is the data that comes after that. So if I send CC 0, 0, that selects the patches from 1, 1 on the SY1000 to 25, 4, which is the first half of the user patches. If I send CC01, I get the second half, which goes from 26.1 to 54. On my system, I have my hex patches in this first half and my normal ones at the end of this half. If you send these values, you get the factory presets, which I'm not interested in for what I'm doing. So in other words, for the SY1000, you have to send bank number information and then the PC patch number. For the GM800 program changes, to choose a patch, which are called scenes on the GM800, I only send the patch number. I kept the original 100 patches or scenes and added my own from 100 onwards to 127. So I'll be sending numbers in this range to select patches or scenes. So let's have a look at the data. Here are some constants I've defined. These are just for colours. To use the Teensy with USB host, you need to include USB host T36.H, and you need to declare a USB host, and I'm calling it my USB. And you need a MIDI device, which I'm calling MIDI Launchpad, and it uses my USB to connect. When the Launchpad starts, it doesn't go into programmer mode. I need to use programmer mode to do all the things I want. To do that, we just need to send some data, and it's the sysx data, and these numbers here are the sysx data that will be sent to turn the Launchpad from normal mode into programmer mode. When you display things on the Launchpad, what I do is I have a buffer where I keep all the colours that I want to display, and it's a 10 by 10 buffer, and I store the colours in that buffer and then send them all at once. My patch locations that I'm using start at bank 3.1 on the SY1000, so this number here just offsets enough to get me to that when I'm sending the PC change. And my normal patches start at patch number 71, which is the start of banks 44 on the SY1000. These numbers here are just offsets, which get added onto these numbers down here, which I'll explain in a minute. I have a muted patch on my GM800, which is patch 127. But these two numbers here are actually patches which have no sound. This one for the hex patch and this one for the normal patch. So I've made them mute for those two particular pickups. Under here is a grid which will match the layout of the Launchpad. So for example, if I bring it back again, you can see it's an 8x8 grid. So I've got numbers here 8x8, and these numbers correspond with these pads on the Launchpad. So these numbers are the actual PC values which will be sent to each synth. The first 5 rows are numbers that I'm sending to the SY1000, and the bottom 3 rows are the ones going to the GM800. These numbers here will be added on to these numbers up here. For example, if I wanted to choose patch 3.1 or 3.1 for the hex pickup, I will be sending 1 plus 7, which is 8, and that will give me 3.1 as the patch. Here is a list of colours which will indicate what sort of patch will be picked when you press a particular pad. For example, blues I'm using for guitar, yellow for wind, brass is orange, and so on. These numbers down here and here, which correspond to the colours for the hex pickup and the colours for the normal pickup, these numbers here are based on colours which the Launchpad responds to. And here is a table of the colours. So for example, 37 here, if you look over here, 37 is this sort of pale blue. 38 is a slightly different blue. Okay, so when I'm in hex mode, these colours will be displayed. When I'm in normal mode, these colours will be displayed. You notice that the GM800 is the same for both of them because I'm always using the hex pickup for that. This section is not necessary, but I like it because it makes a rainbow colour on the N on the Launchpad. Byte blink pad counter is used to blink the patches that have been selected. Some variables being defined here. Synth SY1000 is 1 and Synth GM800 is 2. The current synth is the one that we'll actually be playing through. I'm starting off by defaulting the SY1000. I have an option to allow both synths to play at the same time, and I'm starting off with that being false. And I'm also starting off with the hex pickup being true. So this enables me to switch between the hex and the normal pickups, and this enables me to switch between having both synths or just one at a time. These X's and Y's are used to determine where the pads are that are being lit and which patch is being chosen. I like a grid rather than a linear thing because it suits the layout of the Launchpad. I'm starting off with 2 and 8 for the SY1000, which is patch 3.2, and on the GM800 it's 3 and 1, which turns out to be saxophone. Now I'm using a switch to actually toggle between the two synths. I'm using this library button.h, so I'm defining a button and I'm calling it button toggle synths, and it's using the GPIO pin 4 on the Teensy. So let's look at setup and loop. I'm initiating serial for the serial monitor, which I'm only using when debugging. Then I'm initiating my USB so I can talk to the Launchpad. When the Launchpad sends information back to the Teensy needs to respond to that, and these two functions here, which I'm defining as on note on and on control change, these two functions will receive the data that is sent by the Launchpad. So I'll describe them later on. This line here just begins the button, initializes the button. Then we turn the serial ports on for sending to the two synths. Serial 1 goes to the GM800 on TX1 on the Teensy. Serial 7 goes to TX7 on the Teensy. When you first start up the Launchpad, it's not in programmer mode, but you have to give it time to get ready before you send the sysx to turn it into programmer mode. So I'm delaying for 3 seconds, and then by that time it's okay to send the sys data. These two things here just initialize the display buffer, and which patch is the default patch at the start. Underneath here we have the loop. While looping through, this command here talks to the USB host. This command here reads any MIDI messages that are coming from the Launchpad. Then I check to see if the Footswitch has been pressed. Then I display, I actually put the information into the display buffer ready to be sent to the Launchpad. And then we send all the colours that need to be on the Launchpad and the flashing and all that sort of stuff. And then just a delay so it's not too rapid. Okay, so initializing the display buffer is just going through the display buffer array and making them all black. Initializing the patches, I just send PC change to the synth, and I'm sending it to the GM800, and then I'm sending it to the SY1000. So those two commands just set the synths to the right patches. The next set of functions are all to do with the Launchpad. This section here is about the middle 8 pads, 8x8 pads. And as I said before, on note on is where the programmer will come when the Launchpad receives a note on message from the middle of the Launchpad. So these ones here that are in this box, whenever I press one of those, it's going to come here in the code, and it will have a channel, a note, and a velocity. Now the thing is, when you press a pad and then release it, you get two messages, one on pressing and one on release. When you press it, the velocity will be 127. When you release it, it's 0. I don't want to deal with two messages, I just want one. When velocity is equal to 0, we just ignore that by returning. So what will happen is it'll come here when it's 127, do all this stuff, and it'll come here when it's released on 0 and do nothing. These two commands here are to take the note value, because what happens is when you press a note, the note actually corresponds to the position or the pad that was pressed. And here are the numbers that you get. So for example, if I press this pad, which is top left hand corner on the 8x8 grid, the number 81 will be sent as the note. If I press on this one, the number 11 will be sent. So the Launchpad communicates by sending MIDI notes from this section in the center. So I like to translate those notes into X and Y values, and I'm storing them in XPOS and YPOS. And here's the two functions that do that. So just by doing the modulus of 10 and the dividing by 10 and making sure it's an integer, I get the X position and the Y position. And what that means is, on my system here, this position will be X equals 1, Y equals 1, X equals 2, and so on. So it's just like a grid. If the position is greater than 3, I've decided that's an SY1000 pad. So I take that position, its X and Y coordinates, and store it into the SY1000's X and Y coordinates, and make the current synth SY1000. And if it's not in that position, it means it's the bottom 3, then I store X and Y into the GM800 X and Y coordinates. So that enables me to just press a pad anywhere and it will choose the appropriate synth. So this function here will then send the PC changes to the current synth, and I'll describe that later on. This section here is about those pads on the outside. So it's these ones here. Each one of those, when you press it, sends a CC message. And the CC messages are defined here. So 91 is the top right left hand corner, 98 is the top right hand corner. So the only ones I'm actually interested in is someone presses Control 91, this Boolean, which is either true or false, and if it's true it means I'm in hex pickup mode, if it's false I'm in normal pickup mode. And the other one is if someone presses the button on the top right hand corner, then it toggles between both synths playing or just one. And this is the function here that will actually do the toggling if someone presses that button. So if I press the pad that's 98, which is the top right hand corner, then it will come here and it will do this. It'll both synths playing is a Boolean, so it'll just toggle between true and false. If it's true, then I'll send a PC change to both of them. If it's not, I'll just send a PC change to whatever the current synth is. Okay, so the next section is about displaying colours on the screen. So to display colours on the screen, I've got a buffer, which is just an array, and in the buffer I store the numbers that correspond to the colours. We initialise the buffer so that all the values are black, and then we're going to add the colours that I need in the following section here. So this bit here is just that rainbow thing at the top right hand corner, which I'm not going to worry about. Here, if this is where we load the patch default colors depending on which pickup is being used. So remember before at the top we had these two arrays of numbers. So this section is where we choose which one of these is going to be displayed. So go back down to here. Oops. So if I'm using the SY1000 hex pickup, then I load the patch colors, which are the hex pickup ones. There's a function just below that does that. And I make that particular square, or that pad in the top left-hand corner, green. And green means it's the hex pickup. If I'm not using the hex pickup, then I load the normal colors, which are different to these ones, obviously. And I make the pad in the top left-hand corner red to indicate the normal pickup. Now, this bit here, if the current synth is the SY1000, I make the display buffer 9 and SY1000 green, which just means that the pad that's over on the right here, which is 9 across, and whatever Y is up here will be green. And that's to allow it to blink so I can see where the patch that's currently default is. And if it's the current synth is the GM800, it makes that pad on the right green. So now that we've made all the pads colourful, I want to turn some of them off because I want them to flash. And I only do that when this blink pad counter is less than 3. The blink pad counter is then updated, and if it's bigger than 6, it's reset back to 0. So it's going to cycle through the numbers 0 to 5, and when it's 0, 1 or 2, it's going to be black, and when it's 3, 4, 5, it's going to be green, or whatever the other colour is that was set up here. So that enables the flashing. If both synths are playing or just a single one, so on the top right hand corner, this pad here will either be green or red depending on whether both synths are playing. Okay, so once the buffer has been set, we need to actually send all that information to the Launchpad, and that's what this function here does. In send display buffer to Launchpad, we're going through the display buffer. We're choosing the appropriate note that goes with that position in the grid by using this function here, which actually returns x plus 10 times y to give me the appropriate MIDI note. So we're sending a MIDI note which the Launchpad recognises as a particular pad to light up. We're sending the colour that we need to send. We're sending the channel that it's in, and we're sending this cable 1. Now that's really important. If you send 0 or leave this off, then it will not recognise it. And that's because the Launchpad has 2 modes, one which is DAW mode and one which is programmer mode. And we're in programmer mode, so we have to make sure we send a 1 here to make sure it goes to the right USB connection in the Launchpad. The next thing, checking the Footswitch. So what I need to do is to check to see if the button toggle synth switch has been pressed or released. I'm using released because my foot switches are normally closed. If you had a foot switch which was normally open, you'd need to have pressed there. And then we're going to swap the synths. So if the current synth is equal to the SY1000, make it the GM800. Send a message to actually change the current synth. If it's not the SY1000, then it must be the GM800, so then we make it the SY1000 and then send the message. So this section here is actually basically just checking the switch and then switching synths. Now the last bit we have to do is actually send messages to the synths. So I've got this function here which is send PC change to synth, and depending on which synth it is, it either goes to this function or that function. So here's the first one, the SY1000. Now you notice that there's first of all I've got an if. So if SY1000 hex pickup mode, so if I'm using the hex pickup, I'm going to do this part of it. If it's not the hex pickup, I'm going to do this part of it. So this is for the normal pickup. And at the end, if both synths are not playing, then I need to mute the GM800. So let's just have a look at it. Now, as I said before, on the SY1000, it's a little bit tricky. You can't just send a program change, you have to send a CC message first that selects the appropriate bank of 100 patches. So serial 7 on my system is the SY1000, so I'm writing this particular byte, which is telling the MIDI that it's a CC message. The 0 means CC value is 0, and the data that goes with that is 0. And what that means is I'm picking bank 1 on the SY1000, which means the first half of the user patches. So CC00 is patches 11 to patch 25.4 on the SY1000. So once I've chosen the appropriate 100 patches, I then send the PC value. So here, this byte is being sent to the SY1000, and it's sending a PC message. Oh, and while I'm at it, both of these are on channel 1 because it's B0. If it was B1, it'd be channel 2. So I'm always using channel 1 because they've got separate DIN plugs anyway. Now, this value here is the value that I want to send, which is the value that I get from my PC grid, which I'll just go quickly back up to again. So this value here is the PC patch value that I want to send. So we're sending that PC patch value based on the grid. Now I know it's got 8 minus SY1000 and SY1000X minus 1. That's a mathematical transformation that enables me to use the array above in what looks like XY coordinates to me. So if I'm not using the hex pickup, I do the same thing down here, except that my normal pickup patches are in the second half of the user patches on the SY1000. So I have to write 1 instead of 0 when I'm choosing the 100 patches that I want to use as the bank on the SY1000. So that's actually, if you think of it as like bank 2. So that goes from 26.1 up to 54 on the SY1000. And then again, I then send the PC message from the table above as well. And you notice that SY hex offset and SY normal offset here to make sure that the numbers correspond with the patches that I've got on the SY1000. If both synths are playing, then I don't want to turn off the GM800, so I just return. If only one synth is playing when I come here, then I need to mute the GM800. So I send serial C0, which is a program change message on channel 1, and this number here is my muted patch. For me, it's 127. And then I make the current synth the SY1000. So I need to do the same thing when the GM800 is selected. So if you look here, if the SY1000 is in hex pickup mode, then I need to first of all send a message to the GM800, a program change message, which is based on the grid value, plus 99 because my patches start at location 101. So this will give me the right values when I add 1 onto this, for example, for the first one. That'll end up being C100, which is at location 101. If both synths are playing, I return, which enables this one to be turned on and the other one retains its patch value. If they're not both playing, I need to turn off the SY1000 or send it to a patch that doesn't make any sound. I'm sending it to patch 54, which is a normal patch for me and has no hex pickup in it. So first of all, I write a CC message and I make it CC0 and the data is 1, which then selects bank 2 on the SY1000, and I send the message, the PC message that's 100, which corresponds to 54, which as I said before, makes no sound when I'm using the hex pickup. And then if I'm using normal pickups, it's the same sort of thing. So this section here just sends the program change to the GM800. This section here just sends a program change message to select a hex pickup patch that makes no sound using the normal pickup. And then make the current synth the GM800. Okay, so that's the end of it. Thanks for listening.